I guess the new president doesn't know yet. I think he's supposed to introduce me. But I'm just going to go ahead and start talking.
Good. Voice will be ready.
Okay, I'm Jim Beekler. I'm a professor of physics at WVUP, West Virginia University, Parkersburg. And I usually don't know what I'm talking about.
Are you introducing yourself?
Yeah.
Jim, let me introduce you.
Okay. We're just trying to get started on time, boys. Almost.
Millennia ago, the Hindu poet Kalidasa. Well, I'm not going to. I'll tell you when to start.
Okay.
Cool Hand Luke said just before he was shot in the neck there was a failure by someone to communicate there. Millennia ago, the Hindu poet Kalidasa wrote a hymn that was to be said at that time of day when you can first distinguish between a black thread and a white thread by the light of dawn. It is called the Salutation of the Dawn and goes like this. Listen to the exhortation of the dawn. Look to this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course by all the verities and all the realities of your existence, the bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision, but today, well lived, makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. Such is the salutation of the dawn. So salutations of the dawn to all of you.
Thank you. Same thing.
Our presentation this morning is by Dr. James Beekler, PhD, on Trend or Trendy, the development and acceptance of the paranormal by the scientific community. James Beekler, PhD, is a professor of physics at West Virginia University in Parkersburg. He has the only PhD in the world from an accredited university in paraphysics. He currently conducts theoretical research in the physics of consciousness and edits Yggdrasil, a journal of paraphysics, an electronic journal on the World Wide Web. He has developed a theory of physical reality, the single field theory, which unifies the four fundamental forces of nature as well as quantum physics and relativity. His theory also explains life, mind, and consciousness, and in so doing accounts for the survival of consciousness after death and the reality of ESP and PK phenomena. His theoretical work is a continuum of Einstein's attempt to develop a unified field theory based upon a five-dimensional space-time model. Let's welcome Dr. James Beekler.
Since I lecture in physics, I don't lecture before 11 in the morning because it puts everyone to sleep. We've all had caffeine. This is physics and this isn't physics. I'm also a trained historian of science, so this is more a historical thing, and that's the idea of the word trend. We're going to look at historical trends. The trendy means basically is the paranormal, a trendy thing, you know, something that people just like, a popular culture type thing. So that's the meaning of trend or trendy. The trend is, believers in the paranormal consider the study of paranormal to be scientifically valid. Even the spiritualism movement, the spiritualists in the last century thought that they were acting scientifically, although the scientists did. Sometimes scientists even conduct research in the paranormal. Dean Radin was mentioned last night, others, but that is not official support. The only official support there's ever been is the government support for the remote viewing program until 1995, which supposedly is still going on in secret. Some scientists that believe in either the truth or the possibility of the paranormal, even though they believe in it, they don't think it's a scientific priority. It's just a minor effect. So even there's a few scientists that accept it or its possibility, don't think it should have official funding. So it's not official until it has official funding. And therefore I conclude that if it is scientific, then studies in paranormal should progress along with normal science and follow normal scientific trends. And that's what I'm going to show to in talk this morning. Or is it trendy? However, many scientists and scholars believe that the study of paranormal is non-scientific. The paranormal is non-scientific, then serious study of the paranormal, research by scientists, is just a popular fad or a trendy practice. Scientists will eventually invalidate the paranormal. That's what the people think is non-scientific. Eventually science will get to the point where it can say it's not valid. They can invalidate something. You got to know this. Science does not prove anything. Proof, by definition, is impossible in science. All science can do is validate and verify. If you hear a scientist say he's proved something, you tell that person he is not a scientist. You will be absolutely correct, because in science you can't prove. You can prove things in mathematics, but not in science. If we look at historical trends in science, we should be able to determine if the paranormal is scientific or not. If it follows the scientific trends, then it's part of science. That's my historical hypothesis. A study of historical trends in science indicates the study of paranormal is not only valid, I'm going beyond that, it's not only valid from the scientific perspective, but the study of paranormal has been an integral and important part of science since the birth of science. I'm going beyond saying it's part that follows the trends. I'm saying it's integral. It is part of science and always has been and always will be by definition. In fact, recent trends in science clearly demonstrate that a new scientific revolution is coming. It's not, I'm not the only one who believes that. A lot of scientists think there is a new revolution coming. And so the paranormal is going to be part of that revolution. Just a simple definition of science. Science is a differentiation or winnowing process that decides what part of nature, the world around us, can be studied logically or supported by reason and confirmed by experiment. Three important words in science: logic, reason. Think Spock in Star Trek. You know, the logical thing. He was a scientist, perfectly logical, perfectly reasonable. But theories are developed, and then they have to be supported by observation and experiment. However, nature is the ultimate and final arbiter of what is considered scientific and what is not, rather than opinion. You can't tell nature what to do. You can build a logical system, a reasonable theory, but you can't verify it. Nature verifies it, because science is to study nature. That's the difference between science and mathematics. Mathematics, you can prove things. Nature doesn't have to verify. But science has to be verified by nature. And as a little side, notice the pretty pattern up here? The pretty pattern up here with the leaves and everything? That's from Microsoft's PowerPoint, and the title of that is Nature. I just thought I'd throw that in there. Nature, you'll get it as we go. Nature must be broken down or reduced into what its most common and fundamental parts are for science to build a logical theory of nature. So the whole task has always been, what is the most common, fundamental thing, logical, reasonable thing that is common to everything in nature? And that's the problem the ancient Greeks faced. The first one being Thales, about 650 BC, on the island of Miletus. Then up to 350 BC with Aristotle. And Aristotle is the first one to actually say what is the most basic common element. And he said that in a book entitled Physics. And that's about 350 BC. And fundamentally, he came to the conclusion that the most common denominator of everything in nature is matter and motion. So in physics, we talk about matter and motion. We explain everything as matter and motion. from electromagnetic properties to thermodynamics, heat. Heat is just the motion of particles in the air. The faster they're moving, the hotter it is. Something's hotter, the particles vibrate faster. So everything is broken down to matter and motion. But Aristotle is the first one to say that, so he's considered basically like the original father of science. Motion is ill-defined. They cannot define motion for another 1,500 to 2,000 years. The ancient Greeks, no one up until about 1300 had a concept of what speed or acceleration is. And physics is based on the definitions of speed and acceleration. So they know it's motion, but they don't know how to describe it. For Aristotle, matter is continuous. And he calls this the plenum. That there's no empty space. Aristotle said, nature abhors the vacuum. There is no empty space. Matter is continuous. The air is continuous. There's matter between the planets. There's no empty space out there. And matter occupies a place. So Aristotle had no concept of space. The opposing view was Democritus and the atomism, and his atomism. Atoms for Democritus, atoms are particles of matter, and they move in the vacuum. So since they move in a vacuum, you can see why Aristotle didn't believe that. But still, even the atomists in Democritus did not have a concept of space. We determine space by the relative positions of objects, and then we have a three-dimensional space from that. And that's when I talk about space, that's what I mean. The concept of space is not developed until the first scientific revolution in the 17th century. Now, the first concepts of motion are developed in the 1290s and around 1300 by the Oxford University, England, by the Oxford collegians. The most noteworthy of them was a gentleman by the name of Bradworthy. Then in Europe you have other people over the next few hundred years developing the concepts of speed and acceleration. Nicole Lorraine, William of Ockham, and Jean Lerodin. They're over at the University of Paris at that time, in similar places. The only name you probably recognize up there is William of Ockham. Is anybody familiar with William of Ockham? Occam's razor. The modern version of Occam's razor, he didn't state this way, but this is the way it's interpreted today, is that given two scientific theories, competing theories, the simpler one will be the correct one. And he is a religious person, as all scientists were at that time, so he stated that in terms of God and so on and so forth. So that's the modern version of it. The concepts of space, though, they're developing the ideas of speed and acceleration. Concepts of space are tougher. They can't get at the concept of space. Because during this time, space is equated to God. Remember, all of any education is done by the Catholic Church in Europe at this time. You go to seminary places to learn. God is either, philosophically, God is either immanent or he's transcendent. Immanent meaning basically God occupies every point in space. Transcendent means he's beyond space somehow. So they had philosophical debates, is God immanent or transcendent? But God is not reducible. You can't talk about parts as parts of God. He's a whole thing. Either the whole universe by parts or by rote. So, space cannot be reduced. You can't talk about section space. You can't measure. In order to measure things, you have to talk about a particular part of space. So they have no measurement device, philosophically, no philosophical backing for the concept of measurement. Till a man by the name of Francesco Patrizzi solves a problem during the 1500s. And he defines what is called an absolute space and a relative space. Absolute space would be the scientific version of immanent God. Or I'm sorry, transcendent God. Relative space would be the science, physical part of an immanent God. Now this is all before the scientific revolution. Scientific revolution comes along. And you have a gentleman by the name of René Descartes. And René Descartes defines the philosophical foundations of the scientific revolution about 1640 or 1650. The experimental work and the observation were done by Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo, but not the philosophical foundations. Philosophical foundation is the Cartesian separation into two realms. a realm of mind and a realm of matter. Differentiating between things in space, in nature, determines what is scientific and what is not. Matter is the realm of science. Mind is the realm of spirit. Now, the world of matter, this is where science operates. Notice a correlation between the world of matter, immanent God, relative space. The world of mind, absolute space, God is transcendent. Same ideas, but in a new form in a sense. Now, other people before Descartes talked about this. He's the first one to find it in approximately the way it's defined today, or known today. So, matter is a world of science that's ruled by natural laws. Material reality is a logical mechanism whose rules of operation can be discovered by reason. This is René Descartes. This defined a mechanistic worldview. Our material universe is a large mechanism ruled by natural laws. Natural laws for Descartes are only discoverable by humans through mind. So philosophy rules over nature. In other words, the natural laws are developed in our mind. They're philosophical. They come from God to human mind. But philosophy overrules nature. He is not an observer. That is the scholastic point of view. This is where the rest of the scientific revolution differed from him. Natural laws are given to us by God through mind. Experiments are just a way of confirming the God-given natural laws for Descartes. Then there's the Cartesian world of mind. The world of mind cannot be reduced by science to basic common elements, material physical elements. Mind is ruled by spirit. Mind is the realm of God. This is part of the natural world that is studied by religion. So religion studies the world of mind, science the world of matter. This world cannot be explored by logic or reason. The world of mind can only be explored by intuition and emotion. Mind is substantiated and verified by faith. So mind is verified by faith, matter by experiment and observation. Again, that's Descartes. That changes real quick. This is what I call the Cartesian Paradox. World of mind on one hand, the subject is spirit rather than science. Matter, mechanistic philosophy, or what later became clockwork universe, governs scientific inquiry. Now these present a dilemma. The dilemma is that the Cartesian paradox has changed over the years, and that's the trend in science that I'm following, how the Cartesian paradox has changed over the years to define what science is. But this causes a dilemma for science now, because science is the point where we're actually talking about what is mind. We're trying to have a science of the mind. And so this is a dilemma because these Cartesian limits are about ready to fall. What limits science is about ready to fall. And when it falls, the paranormal is going to become part of science. That's my ultimate contention that I'm showing here. Along comes Isaac Newton in the latter part of the 17th century. He publishes the Principia in 1687. First of all, he defines matter by its mass and inertia. Once he's got mass, that handles the matter part. Then he defines absolute and relative space, updating what Patrizi had said a century earlier. Then Newton says that the mechanistic world of natural laws deals only with relative space. Relative space is the domain of science. Absolute space is the container of all matter. Absolute space is only implied by relative space. It cannot be directly perceived or detected. Now, a lot of people get this wrong. They think that science, according to Newton, science operates in absolute space. No, all science is done in relative space. The experiments in relative space imply the existence of an absolute space, something to contain the relative space. Now, he's different from Descartes then, because Descartes says natural laws come from, or for Newton, Newton says natural laws come from observing and explaining nature, not from the mind. So Newton, in this case, follows Kepler, Galileo, and Copernicus, who observed nature to derive natural laws, rather than deriving them philosophically through the mind. then natural laws are confirmed by experiment, not God's version of natural laws confirmed by experiment. Natural laws as derived from theories, from observation, are confirmed by experiment. That's the difference with Descartes. Newton said, my ideas, or I stand on the shoulder of giants. His idea came from giants. He referred to Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Patrizi, and a few other ones. He did not refer to Descartes, because he disliked Descartes intensely. And it's my guess that this is why. Because Descartes thought that natural laws came through mind from God, whereas Newton knew they came from observation of nature. So, absolute space cannot be confirmed by experiment. Now, scientifically, absolute space is infinite, eternal, indivisible, indestructible, and three-dimensional. That's Newton in the Principia. Well, absolute space has the same characteristics as God. Newton was a very religious person. But absolute space is not God. Absolute space is the sensorium of God. In other words, God acts on normal world through, or senses the normal world through absolute space. So he's equating them, but he's not saying they're the same thing. He said absolute space is the sensorium of God. So by associating absolute space with God, Newton effectively renders the absolute world of mind, or the absolute space, this equivalent to the world of mind, and that's where God is, in a sense. Mind in Newton's universe. Well, what is mind then in Newton's universe? Newton does not provide a place for life and mind in physics of science, because science covers the relative. Since Newton doesn't mention mind or consciousness, basically he relegates mind and consciousness to the world of mind. So there can't, according to Newton, in a sense he implies, there can't be a science of mind. It can't be, it's non-reducible. So the scientific state, life, mind, and consciousness are therefore limited to purely mechanical, chemical, as chemistry evolves, considerations, and that's very little. A good example of this is the Frankenstein monster. The Frankenstein monster is taken from parts from a cadaver, put together. So the Frankenstein monster is a Newtonian machine, and it's dead. It has to have something extra. That something extra is life. And back in that day, electricity and magnetism were considered occult forces. They weren't studied by science, especially, not at that time. They were occult forces. And how is Frankenstein brought together? How is he given life? Lightning, electricity. So they associate and electricity with life at that time. And those were occult forces, not the world of matter, the world of mind. Science can say nothing about the ultimate origins, meanings, or purpose of mind, according to Newton. So the ultimate purposes, meanings, and origin of life are relegated to religion. Religion is the world of mind. The origins, meaning, and purpose of life are effectively surrendered to religion by science as of the year 1700. Now this is what I call Newtonian space, and it redefines the mind-matter, the Cartesian Paradox, the dilemma. The absolute is the sensorium of God, the relative is the realm of science, and what later became known as the clockwork universe. It's like a clockwork. The universe is like clockwork. It's the mechanism. Depending on what you believed in, God either designed it and wound it and went away and left us, or has to step in every once, give it an extra second here or there, and that would be a miracle. That's called the clockwork. In the 1700s, they developed a whole religion based on this, and it was called deism. You can look it up on, you can Google it and find out all about deism. But then that became a new religion in the 1700s, proposed mainly by the French philosophes before the revolutions. Okay, now, again, science cannot legitimately comment on the nature of life, mind, consciousness, death, or afterlife. If you don't know if you can't say what life is, you certainly can't say what death is, and you can't define an afterlife unless you can say what life is. They are outside the scope of science. So this is the modified Cartesian paradox. Boundaries are thus set between what is scientific and what is religious. The redefined world of mind includes the supernatural, the occult, and the paranormal. The redefined world of matter is governed by Newtonian physics and Newtonian natural laws, and then that's called Newtonianism. Newtonian science and physics slowly conquers the world in the next 2 centuries. By 1900, Newtonian science rules. But science is just part of natural philosophy. You don't go to college, university, to major in physics. Natural philosophy. And natural philosophy included all of what we know today as the sciences, but also included music and all other studies. So there is no science per se. That's why it's science with a small s here. You learn natural philosophy, the philosophy of nature, and that's the world of matter. Now, as Newtonian science becomes more successful in explaining more phenomenon, it expands. Newtonian science is extremely, in the 1700s, 1800s, successful in explaining nature, the world of matter. It progresses by an application of an expanding realm of phenomena. It eventually incorporates electricity. Electricity is no longer, from about 1750 onward, electricity is no longer an occult force. Science begins studying it. Who's the first scientist here? Develops the first valid theory of electricity. We're in Philadelphia. Who is it? Benjamin Franklin, right. He was the first American scientist. And the kite experiment was a real experiment. He captured electricity, he captured a bolt of lightning in a Leyden jar, and tested to show that lightning was just static electricity. That you can consider that he had what is called the one fluid model. A positive fluid and a negative fluid. Sounds like science. That's the start of electrical theory. So electricity is now no longer an occult force. It's as science expands, it explains electricity. Same with magnetism and other phenomena. Older occult phenomena slowly become scientific and they become parts of natural philosophy. So, natural philosophy, the world of matter, is slowly encroaching on the world of mind. Both entered in the 1700s. Then in the late 1700s, chemistry and geology start. But again, they're not sciences in their own right. They're still part of physics at this time. They're still part of natural philosophy. The origin of the word physics, what it means. Physics is a Greek word for nature. So study of physics is a study of all of nature. So physics is the basis of natural philosophy. But still, it's natural philosophy at this time. In Newtonian science, life is not part of physics. He'd already ruled it by not doing life, he ruled it out. But it becomes associated in the late 1700s with chemistry. In particular, organic chemistry is the chemistry of life back then. That's the chemistry of life. But then in 1828, a German scientist by the name of Böhler synthesizes urea. They had always thought urea was an organic chemical that are going to be produced by living organisms. He synthesizes in the laboratory. So all of a sudden now, as of 1828, the growing science of life, chemistry, gee, we can make organic chemicals in the laboratory so they're no longer associated with life. Causes a little bit of shaking in what is mind. Life is still something beyond chemistry and beyond physics. Now it's beyond chemistry and physics. So it's still part of the realm of mind. Then natural philosophy comes to an end in the 1840s. Newtonian science is so successful by the 1840s that the different sciences break apart. Basically what happens is thermodynamics, heat, and temperature are part of chemistry. Then they show that they're just due to the mechanical actions of atoms and molecules. So heat becomes part of physics rather than chemistry. Originally heat is an element, one of the elements, called caloric. But in the 1840s, James Joule does an experiment to show that heat is just mechanical energy at the atomic molecular level. So heat becomes part of physics, drops out of chemistry. But by this time, chemistry had already grown. They've been growing since the late 1700s. Chemistry jumps off as a separate science. That's due partly to the fact that John Dalton revives the atomic theory of Democritus in the early 1800s. So now the atom theory, the theory of atoms, is the basic theory of all chemistry. So now chemistry has this basic theory, it jumps off as a separate science. Geology, in the late 1830s, Charles Lyell defines uniformitarianism, which explains the geological features of the Earth. So geology is now ready, it's got its basic theory, it's ready to become a science. Physics unites heat theory with the rest of physics, and so physics jumps out. That's the end of natural philosophy. After the 1840s, we don't talk about natural philosophy, we talk about physics, chemistry. Biology gets its start from medicine and physiology. So all the sciences evolved out of the 1840s. So after the 1840s, we can talk about the sciences themselves. Also, the philosophy. See, there's never a need for a philosophy of science because science is natural philosophy. In 1840, you have the first philosopher of science, William Whewell, W-H-E-W-E-L-L. That's pronounced Whewell. I tell my students when I'm doing history of science class, if they can pronounce that, I'll give them an A in the course. I haven't had a student do it yet. I used to think it was Whewell until I was told it was Whewell. But William Whewell announces in the year 1840 that science has become so specialized that now we can start talking about the people working in science as scientists. So the word scientists is coined in 1840. So that's the beginning of science as opposed to natural philosophy. Again, as science is progressing based on the Newtonian model as it expands its realm of phenomena it explains. Now, geology comes along, uniformitarianism. Uniformitarianism requires an older age of the earth than religion can account for. Religion can only account in the Bible, Christian religion, for about 6,000 years or more. Geology comes on and says millions of years with mountains and rivers and everything to form through the uniformitarian action of erosion and such. Geology then leads to Darwin's theory of evolution in 1859. Whoops, life becomes part of geology. Evolution indicates that life and mind are results of a purely arbitrary mechanical process rather than religious design. So life comes back into, robbed out of the realm of mind, back into matter, out of geology. This places severe stresses on religion, and established religion reacts badly, as it is still doing today. But I will show that religion picks the wrong enemy. These are the results of expanding Newtonianism. The world, explaining the world of matter as opposed to the world of mind. Newtonian theories conquered the occult forces of E&M, electricity and magnetism, with a single theory in the 1850s. It wasn't electricity and magnetism. After the 1850s, it's electromagnetism. Kinetic theory of matter evolves into thermodynamics, a new area of physics, at the same time. So by the 1850s, 60s, 70s, there's nothing left for science to do. It's conquered the world of nature, it thinks. It's so successful by the 1890s, scientists begin to think that science is complete. Scientists say, science is complete. We can now explain everything. It can't expand. There are no other phenomena for it to explain natural phenomena. So where does it expand? Into the world of mind. It's taking over from religion, what was part of the world of mind. Science turns to mind, but as a philosophical pursuit. Philosophers ask questions on the origins of physical laws. What is reality? Are we actually describing reality by our physical laws? Do the physical laws in science and physics, do they represent our mind? Or are the physical laws there in nature? And we're just perceiving them and stating them in our own terms. Ernst Mach, famous physicist, Mach 1, Mach 2, he developed theories about the speed of sound and such, so the speed of sound we call Mach 1. He did a lot of other things. But he proposes a middle-of-the-road compromise to answer this dilemma. See, all along what we're doing is redefining the Cartesian Paradox by expanding the realm of science, by incorporating things that were part of the realm of mind. Ernst Mach comes along with these problems now, his middle-of-the-road compromise. The physical laws do not represent mind, but they don't represent material reality. What they represent, they're an efficient, convenient way of stating our sensations of reality. That goes between the material world and mind. It's our sensations, our perceptions. So the physical laws are just a shorthand way of stating our sensations of nature. Physical laws are not part of either matter or mind. They're the go-between. Physical laws are uniform and efficient ways of describing, and this leads to a philosophical practice called positivism. Mach denied being a positivist. Positivism was developed by Auguste Comte in the 1820s and 1830s, and it was a philosophy of sociology, not science, but sociology. So Mach was considered a logical positivist or an empirical positivist, and he hated that. But he gave rise to a whole new philosophy of science based on this middle-of-the-road approach. At the same time, this is what's happening in science. A philosophy of mind is developing, and the relationship between natural laws and mind. At the same time, you have, gee, coincidence, modern spiritualism arises. Now, how many of you are familiar with modern spiritualism? Where did it start?
1842 in Hydesville, New York.
The date I've always been given is 1848 with the Fox sisters.
You're right.
But I'd say absolutely not. All that was the match that lit the fuse. The dynamite was already there. The dynamite, what caused modern spiritualism, the Fox sisters and the rapping set it off. But that was not the cause. The cause was expanding Newtonianism, the success of Newtonianism. Modern spiritualism is a popular reaction, cultural reaction, to the same historical forces that affect the scientific attitude towards mind. That's why Mach and modern spiritualism at the same time. They're reacting to the same cultural factors. Spiritualists regard modern spiritualism as scientific. It was triggered by the rappings in 1848, but it's not the cause. That's a bum rap. Successes of Newtonian science were a primary factor and created an atmosphere, a cultural atmosphere, for rapping similar phenomena to expand rapidly. They've never been able to explain why all of a sudden, from 1848 with Hydesville, New York, all of a sudden everybody in the world is doing that. That's because science, the successes of Newtonianism, had created a cultural, we're starting to create a cultural revolution that easily accepted this. So, the direct even the direct precursors of modern spiritualism. I'm the only person in the world that says it's related to Newtonianism, by the way. But this is my historical interpretation. This is the trend. It's a trend, part of the scientific trends. And I'm showing the scientific trends are paralleling spiritualism, parapsychology, and the study of psychical phenomena. The direct precursors to modern spiritualism, these are recognized by other historians, were mesmerism, phrenology, popular witchcraft, alchemy. What happened to alchemy? Became chemistry, right. See, it's that trend. They took the mysticism out of the alchemy and it became chemistry. And mysticism and the early spiritualists. Modern spiritualism was not religious with a capital R. It was religious with a small r, because it's a personal religion. So you had no authorities telling you how to worship. Earlier spiritualism, before the 1840s, was about heavenly spirits. Modern spiritualism was about spirits of the dead. That's how they differentiate between modern spiritualism and early spiritualism. So modern spiritualism was a feeble but popular attempt to render the afterlife scientific by non-scientists. Its growth was as much a consequence as Darwinian evolution as something else. Because Darwin comes along, says humans evolved from a mechanical process, is very Newtonian. And of course, what distinguishes human on the animal chain? We have minds. So ultimately, mind results from a mechanical process of evolution. That's a direct challenge to religion. Modern spiritualism was rejected by most scientists and scholars following Cartesian boundaries, but some scientists still investigate. And of course, that was the birth of the Society of Psychical Research and the American Society of Psychical Research by William James and Smith. But the big thing was that now Darwin comes along, and all of a sudden mind becomes part of science after 1859. Results. The earlier questions about consciousness 9, were part of religion or the philosophy of metaphysics. This is before the 1840s. But now, at the end of the 1800s, they become scientific under the guise of the philosophy of science. Then Darwin's influence on that. The result is all these cultural forces come together and psychology emerges out of the philosophy of science at the end of the 19th century. Science, Newtonianism has become so successful that now they start thinking about having a special science of mind, and that is the birth of psychology in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. The birth of psychology came from a combination of sources when the scientific and scholarly communities come to realize that a science of mind is now a necessity. The founders of psychology: William Wundt, experimental psychology; Gustav Fechner, psychophysics of the brain; William James provides consciousness and a philosophical basis for psychology. The modern spiritualism movement, the occult, is a direct action of mind on mind, mind on matter. Go ask anybody know psychologists besides Ruth here. Ask them, did psychology evolve out of modern spiritualism? And you'll throw them into a fit. But it did. It's the same cultural scientific forces acting here. The roots of psychology were in modern spiritualism. If they don't like it, too bad. That's the way it goes. Sigmund Freud was another founder, but he had the psychiatry and medicine part of it. And this is one that no one else will tell you but me: the successes of Newtonian physics and science. And of course that brings in Ernst Mach and the pure philosophy of science. They also were important. And Ernst Mach is considered by some people as one of the founders of psychology. The same historical forces that forced the emergence of psychology and modern spiritualism also led directly to the second scientific revolution. In the 1890s, scientists are saying that physics can explain everything. Then they find out that Newtonian physics has problems. That's the second scientific revolution. Do you see how modern spiritualism is actually part of science? It develops the same trends. Modern spiritualism, even though scientists will admit it was part of science, it's just as important to the evolution of science as the theory of heat or the theory of electricity or anything else. 1890s, they mark the height of the success of Newtonian science. Science mistakenly thinks it is on the verge of explaining everything. What is science saying now?
On the verge of explaining everything.
The toe theory, the theory of everything, physicists are looking for.
Right,
The situation right now is paralleling the pre-revolutionary period of the last century before one. Science mistakenly thinks it is on the verge of explaining everything in the 1890s. Science does not recognize it has serious problems. But if it does have problems, we will explain it. Newtonianism is so successful that when they discovered the electron, radioactivity, oh, that's okay, we'll explain it. Science does not realize that the changing Cartesian boundaries are its greatest problem. They're redefining the world of matter at the expense of mind, expanding into the paranormal area to further progress science. Both modern spiritualism and psychology are products of shifting boundaries between matter and mind, the Cartesian Paradox. Modern spiritualism was an integral part of science in its existence and its development parallel the other scientific successes. The boundaries do not stabilize again between mind and matter, what is scientific, what is non-scientific, until the 19-teens, after the second scientific revolution. So, second scientific revolution. Literally, electromagnetism. We have radio in the 1880s, 1890s. Electromagnetism, an accepted theory by the 1880s, 1890s. The only trouble is it gives different results than normal Newtonian mechanics. In phenomena that are both electrical and involve matter. This leads to clashes. In 1900, the concept of black body radiation is solved by Max Planck, leads to quantum theory. 1905, electrodynamics, electromagnetic theory, dynamics, Newtonian material physics. Electrodynamics dissolved by Einstein, that's the birth of relativity. 1905, Einstein solves the photoelectric effect, basic effect that light hitting the surface, the metallic surface, causes an electrical current. Photocells. All photocell technology is based on this. That's part of quantum theory. That's solved by Einstein in 1905. And he gets the Nobel Prize for that in 1922 or 3. 1905, Brownian motion. If you look at water through a microscope, you'll see dust particles and bacteria bouncing around. randomly like this. That's called Brownian motion because he's the one who discovered it. That was not explained until Einstein came along in 1905 and said that's due to the kinetic motion of molecules of water. Developed the equations. Those equations were put to an experiment by Jean Perrin in 1907, 1908, and proved the existence of the atom. So you can say that Einstein offered proof or verification for the existence of the atom by his Brownian motion paper, 1905. Now, the results of relativity, first of all. Relativity, we had absolute space and time, relative space and time, Newtonianism. Relativity theory says you don't need absolute space and time. He doesn't say they don't exist. He says they are superfluous to physics. All you need is relative space and relative time. All the laws of physics, including electrodynamics, can be explained by space and time. But time is equivalent to space. So you go from three-dimensional space with time to four-dimensional space-time. So absolute space is lost to physics. Well, absolute space had been associated to the Cartesian paradox with mind. So in a sense, that sets mind off. Physics can't deal with mind because of that. So physics loses absolute space, but nobody cares about the links. Why don't they care about the links between mind and absolute space in the Cartesian paradox? Because psychology is now there and it picks up the slack. So psychology gets mind in this way. There's no physics of mind. There can't be a physics of mind, is what I'm saying. So physics doesn't need to worry about the concept of mind. It's now a matter for psychology. Religion should be yelling bloody murder at the loss of absolute space, because that was the relationship between religion and science. Science doesn't care about absolute space. That casts religion off. They're yelling about theory of evolution. They'd be clobbered by absolute space and never even realized it. They still don't realize it today. The debates now are all about evolution. They should have debated about the loss of absolute space in science, because that's ultimately more important. Because that was what related religion and science together. Then you have early quantum theory, the theory of the microscopic world. The situation is far more complex with quantum theory. It introduces statistics and probability as a fundamental nature of life. Einstein says everything is relative. Quantum mechanics says everything is statistical. Everything is happening at the microscopic level by chance. Chance is built into the nature of matter. This opens the possibility of a limit to the reducibility of space and time. Remember, physics has to reduce the world to its most common elements, matter and motion. But now, quantum theory says there's a limit beyond which we can't see what reality is. That leads to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle in 1926, which formalizes the statistical view of nature. It changes the emphasis of science from determinism to indeterminism. In Newtonian physics, according to Simon de Laplace, back around 1800, is asked by Napoleon Bonaparte to explain Newtonian physics. And this is the explanation he gives. Tell me the position and the velocity of every particle in the universe, and I will predict the complete future of the universe. I will determine the future of the universe, given the laws of Newtonian physics. That is called determinism. But now quantum mechanics, that is the basis of Newtonian thought. Along comes quantum mechanics, say statistics and probability is built into the very nature of atoms. That's very indeterministic. So quantum mechanics comes along and changes the Cartesian debate from being a debate about matter and mind to one about determinism and indeterminism. And it lumps thermodynamics, physics, chemistry, and everything else with mind, determinism. What is the most deterministic thing in the universe? God, supreme being. What is the most indeterministic thing at the other end of the scale? Physics, quantum physics.
Hey, what's your time, Jim? What's your time?
Watch your space.
I'm waiting for a signal.
Watch your space and time.
I have to watch my space.
Yours is indeterminate.
I'm dilated right now. I'm dilated. Okay, these consequences of the quantum theory are all recognized by science. These are common things recognized by science. But what science does not recognize, the scientific community does not realize, there are unforeseen results of quantum theory. These results have gone totally unnoticed because the scientific community is so mesmerized by quantum theory, it does not realize what it's gotten itself into. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle splits space and time apart. Whereas Einstein united them into space-time, they're considered as separate by quantum theory. Yet quantum theory keeps on saying that it's working in a space-time background, even though it's not working in a space-time background, it's working in a space-time separated background. They don't know that yet. After 100 years, they still don't know that.
Now, why don't they know that? I don't think so. We can tell that.
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. Consciousness, then they come along and say consciousness causes the wave function to collapse to create material reality. So you have consciousness creating material reality in quantum physics. Yet they think consciousness can be explained by quantum theory. Well, if consciousness creates physical reality, then how can that physical reality act as a basis for theory of consciousness? It seems to me that consciousness must be outside of material reality and exist prior to material reality. So under quantum physics, they've changed the Cartesian paradox to be determinism versus indeterminism, and consciousness versus quantum-created material reality. They completely changed it. They don't know that. They think quantum theory can explain consciousness, but it can't by very definition of quantum theory. They don't realize that either. I keep telling them they don't want to listen to me. Therefore, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle introduces a new version of the Cartesian paradox. Not mind and matter, but consciousness and collapse. Quantum theorists would deny this, and I have been called perverse for making the claim because science no longer associates the paradox with physics and thinks that psychology is taking care of the paradox. Now, you'd never guess who calls me perverse for thinking this way. Bernard Carr, ex-physicist, cosmologist of Britain, and ex-president of the Society of Psychical Research. In an article he wrote, he calls me perverse for saying this. And he's on my side. The quantum theorists just ignore me. Psychology even refuses to consider the paradox as valid. So we've got a whole new situation. Quantum theory has managed to redefine primary duality, what is scientific and what is not scientific on its own terms, and thereby obfuscate the central paradox for science. In other words, science is looking for the wrong thing now. They're not trying to solve the mind-matter paradox. They're trying to solve quantum mechanics. They're trying to solve the difference between determinism and indeterminism. And there isn't one. But they imply, not unknowingly, consciousness and classical ways. So this is the actual part. They should be looking for this. They should be looking for this. They're stuck on determinism and indeterminism. Quantum theory has been fallible, produced nada for the past 30 years. It is regressing. Psychology, after the second scientific revolution, psychology denies its historical roots and regresses to something called behaviorism, the Machian, positivistic approach. It's the middle road approach. James wanted consciousness to be the foundation of psychology. It's not. Behaviorism is. Behaviorism is a mechanical Newtonian process. It's a middle-of-the-road solution to changing Cartesian boundaries. Behaviorism looks at mechanisms and interactions between minds rather than mind directly. And of course, that's a result of Mach's positivistic influence and the influence of quantum mechanics on mind. Then parapsychology falls out. Parapsychology is the behaviorist answer to the paranormal. Human lab rats and statistics. In other words, parapsychology is directly, subconsciously influenced by quantum theory. In physics, what is the wave? The wave is called the psi function. What is the paranormal called? Psi. Don't you see an influence of maybe quantum mechanics here, the positivistic? These people are blind. Only 2 physicists worked professionally in parapsychology before 1970. Parapsychologists argue in the 50s and 60s, is psi purely mental or is it partly physical? They're not even looking for a physical basis before the 70s. This is very Cartesian mind-oriented debate. Mind and matter. is parapsychology is paranormal, mental, or partly physical. It's the old mind-matter debate. And then parapsychology is legitimized in 1969. The PA joins the American Association for Advancement of Science. So then, after 1970, parapsychology changes. This is the cusp. In 1970, about 1970, there are bellwether changes in both science and culture during the 60s. We all lived through it. We know about those things. This change, but it was science. It wasn't just culture change in the 60s. Science did. These are bellwether changes. We are entering a pre-revolutionary period. All the hallmarks of a Kuhnian pre-relativistic period, or a pre-revolutionary period. The only questions left to answer are the course, properties, and strength of the coming revolution in science. Physics after 1970. Pre-revolutionary period begins. Quantum theory claims it's the most accurate theory ever invented by science because they can predict observable outcomes to the 12th decimal place with quantum field theory. So they've been hammering relativity theory. Relativity theory was dead until 1960 because it's such a subtle effect that it could be measured in the laboratory. But with the space program and everything, general relativity has been increasing in popularity since 1970. It's right on the cusp. Now, even though relativity, quantum theory claims it is the most basic, most fundamental, that particle exchange, there are no forces, there's no gravity. The moon and Earth are shooting gravitons at each other, and that's gravity. So they reduce the common electric field, magnetic field, gravitational field to particle exchange. That's called quantum field theory. It's a load of crap. But it can estimate things, it can predict things out to the 12th decimal place. And so they say, therefore, quantum theory is the fundamental basis of nature. So the coming unified field theory will be based on quantum theory. They do not want to admit, since the 1980s, relativity theory, based rather on the discrete particles but on continuity of the field, can now make predictions out to the 12th decimal place. In binary stars, where one star is orbiting another one, relativity theory can time the orbit theoretically predict the orbital periods up to 12 decimal place accuracy, and probably get the 13th or 14th decimal place of accuracy. But the light from binary stars twinkles coming through our atmosphere. That's the 13th or 14th place. So relativity theory is actually more accurate than quantum theory now, but the physics community will not admit that relativity theory and continuity is more accurate. So in the last 30 years, quantum theory has been regressing. General relativity continuity has been progressing rapidly. That's part of the cusp. General relativity becomes relevant and grows, but not to the extent that continuity gains adherence. The world is still a quantum-based world, why people like me can't get by. The idea of theories of everything is born. Well, Einstein was looking for a theory of everything. So the quantum theorists say they're following Einstein's program. But he wanted to base it on the continuity of the field. Whereas quantum theorists want Einstein's theory on their terms, based on particle exchange, and Einstein is rolling in his grave now because of that. They say they're being very Einsteinian just to get popularity from his name. That's not what's happening. There is, in a sense, even though general relativity and quantum theory are competing theories, and competing theories are a prerequisite for a pre-revolutionary period, the quantum people say there's no competition because eventually they'll re-explain general relativity, gravitational theory, as exchange of gravitons, particles. They've been trying for 40 years. They still haven't discovered a graviton. They've been looking. They can't find it. Why? After 40 years looking for something, if you can't find it, what can you assume? It doesn't exist. They don't want to realize that, though. They've been actually since the 60s, so it'll be 50 years. Quantum relativity are now equally accurate, so neither should hold preference over the other regarding fundamental nature. Competing theories are a hallmark of pre-revolutionary period. Very few scientists and scholars will even admit that quantum relativity are competing theories. Quantum theory is so dominant in culture and in science that they assume that any theory of the future will be based on quantum physics. That's why they can't find a theory of everything. Latest results are the superstring theory, brain theory. They haven't done anything in 30 years they've existed. It's a theory in science that is not based on current science, has very little to do with science, it's purely mathematical, they predict nothing. And yet there are thousands of scientists gobbling up. You go get Scientific American, there's another story about superstring theory. Well, superstring theory has nothing to do with science, eventually. Other scientists are now starting to state this too. But it's an extension of quantum theory. No one will accept or admit the existence of deficiencies in quantum theory as valid reasons to reassess the theory. The problems of quantum theory not being recognized are just making the revolution more likely. And of course, quantum theory is defining the mind-matter barrier, which defines what science is, and they have problems with it, so we've got a false sense of what is scientific and what is non-scientific, so what is being left in the lurch here? Paranormal. The paranormal does not fit the quantum paradigm. But quantum theory is trying to explain what consciousness is, even though the very basis of quantum theory places consciousness outside of quantum theory, but they're still trying to do it. The relevance of consciousness in science increases due to quantum physics because consciousness is needed to collapse the wave function, but there's still no reason for an existence of a quantum Cartesian paradox. Physicists enter parapsychology, the birth of paraphysics in the 1970s. Neither psychology nor science in general recognize there is a paradox. They think it's been solved. Behaviorism does not recognize